to another episode of On the Middle East. My name is Amrin Zaman, and I'll be once again talking about the Iran conflict. A 2-week ceasefire declared by the United States on April 8th has been extended, though it's unclear for how long. A second round of peace talks that were supposed to take place between US and Iranian negotiators in Pakistan this week fell through. Iran says it will not participate in the talks while the US blockade of the Strait of Hormuz remains in place. With us here to discuss the standoff and the risk of renewed war is Hassan Ahmadian, a Harvard-trained associate professor of West Asian Studies at the University of Tehran. I caught up with Hassan in Doha. So welcome to our program, Hassan. It's great to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Appreciate having me.
Well, we have a very bizarre situation. We thought we would have talks, but then the United States decided to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, and now Iran says until that blockade ends, there is no question of returning to the talks. We seem kind of stuck.
Well, I think we've seen a deadlock at this point because of two basic things. First, Iran is talking about give and take, but it seems that the United States doesn't look at diplomacy as a give and take. Witkoff was very clear in that we are shocked. Why are Iranians not capitulating? He said the president was shocked. Why the Iranians? So they're looking at the negotiations as a means for Iran to capitulate to U.S. demands. Second thing is that the Iranians are very much worried about the outcome of such a give and take or such a diplomatic effort, because the first time they engaged, they were attacked in the middle of negotiations. The second time they engaged, they were attacked again in the middle of negotiations. And now they went for negotiations in Pakistan to be surprised by a U.S. Moving goalpost. They brought in a siege to cash it out on the table. So if you are to go for negotiations and then be faced with escalation, be it through means of war, that is attacks, or means of economic warfare, siege, then what's the, why would you go for negotiations? And so there's a debate in Tehran saying that if it is to escalate the situation even further, if the United States to increase its demands, if the give and take is to move away further from us, why should we engage? And I think their precondition of the siege being lifted is based on this reality or this realization that if we go to negotiations, we will be faced with more escalation on the part of the United States.
But the calculation in Washington appears to be one of trying to really squeeze Iran, well, economically. You heard the White House spokesperson claim that the country is losing $500 million a day in lost revenue from oil sales because it can no longer sell its oil. How sustainable is this position for Iran?
Well, if the siege is to be implemented as it is being said, the pressure will be really, strong on Iran. But so far, there is no implementation. The Iranians have said that if it is implemented against our ships and ports, we will retaliate because it's an act of war. Siege by an adversary, despite or against international law with no mandate by the Security Council, is an act of war. And it is being viewed as such. And so the Iranians are saying that if it is to be implemented, we will retaliate. Now, there's a single incident that it was implemented against an Iranian ship that was seized. The Iranians said we retaliated by drones against a U.S. ship. The U.S. didn't announce it. And yesterday, they also went against two ships to say that where things can go or to signal where things can go if this is to continue. Personally, I believe if the United States is to implement it, I think we are bound to see escalation, military escalation,
But
because the
at what
Iranians.
point
Well,
does Iran test that resolve? That's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, how long do we have before us before the war resumes again, if
well,
neither side blinks?
I think Iran does not have the capacity, or the basically it can't blink first, because the things that blink him first would mean its independence will be at stake. There is no stopping the United States. It will move step by step towards Tehran. That's, in the minds of not only officials in Iran, in the minds of many ordinary people. That's why you see demonstrations demanding resistance in all Iranian cities. It's really, I couldn't foresee this, the magnitude of people, ordinary people in the streets, demanding revenge, resistance, we shouldn't give up, etc. And so it's not about Iran changing its position. It's about Iran going for a give and take. Now, who blinks first? I think the United States imposing a siege, at least verbally till now, that's an escalation. If it moves it to practice, to basically enforce it in practice, Iranians will have no other choice but to retaliate. Because that would, as you said, would mean squeezing Iran's economy further, and that's not acceptable. That Iran cannot live with it.
In the meantime, you have China coming out for the first time and saying very explicitly that this, the strait needs to be reopened. I mean, the economic costs of this war are growing for everybody, for all of the stakeholders. And so at what point, does Iran feel enough pressure that it will have to blink? And you say it won't. And so by your reckoning, war seems inevitable, because I really don't see the Americans blinking either.
Yeah. Well, the Americans don't need to blink. They just need to do what they are doing. Just verbally have a siege, not implement it. The Iranians are using their roads. They're sending their ships. They're receiving warnings. Don't care about it. Move ahead, and that's what's happening. Only a single ship was stopped and seized.
But turning to the internal debate in Iran, there is, of course, this idea that there are strong divisions inside Iran, with, for example, the president on the one hand towing a so-called more moderate line, and the IRGC being far more hawkish. What do you have to say about that, Hassan? Does this reflect the reality?
See, Amberine, on the previous point, the Iranians are saying that we are doing business as usual. There's no change. Now, number of ships might have dropped. That those are not maybe Iranian ships. The Iranians are saying only a single ship was stopped. The rest are going and coming back. The U.S. is warning them, but they are not caring about U.S. warnings. And so Iran's shipments are moving. That's very clear from what we get out of Tehran. On the other question, I think what you describe is basically a depiction in the United States. I mean, President Trump spoke about many things, including divisions within Tehran, including that our hardline is taken over. But people familiar with the Iranian political system would defy that from the get-go. Now, if there are indicators to that direction, we might consider. There is not a single indication that tells us that there's a division and that there is a party, that is the IRGC or whomever, that is taken over. We had an announcement by the Supreme National Security Council after the ceasefire that is being observed, including in the Strait of Hormuz and within Iran. Everything happened in the past 2 weeks, including going for negotiations in Pakistan and withdrawing from negotiations in Pakistan, the way Iran talks about future negotiations of future war, all of it is within that frame. So I don't see really that change in Iran's political system. But as you said, there are more voices within what is, perceived in the West as hardliners in Iran, that is the IRGC. I think it's only natural. We saw it in the 12 Days War as well, and we see it in every crisis involving Iran and the United States. Military saber rattling grows up in the United States and in Iran. And I think this is no exception. The system, as I understand it, is up and running as it was before the war.
And what do we know of the Supreme Leader? Because we haven't heard from him since the start of the war. Is he part of the decision-making process as far as we know?
That's the process. He's on the top of it. And basically, he is pivotal in decision-making. The team going to Pakistan cannot go there without him ratifying it. That's according to the Iranian constitution and according to his task as a supreme leader. And so I would imagine that he is calling the shots after the decisions being decided within the Supreme National Security, as it was the case before the war. Now, why is he not appearing? That's an open question. Many are asking. But I think the main thing here is security. The previous supreme leader was assassinated. And I think the Iranians, the top security job now or task now is to preserve Iran's leadership, the leader and the top echelon that are not assassinated
but
far.
We've seen other leaders, the president, the foreign minister, going out in public, taking part in rallies, demonstrations. So obviously this has raised questions, first of all, about the state of health of the supreme leader. But you seem to believe that he is alive and running things.
Well, I'm not. See, I'm looking at it as you look at it. But within the Iranian framework, they're saying that it's security.
Okay.
The Iranian perception is that after the ceasefire, the United States has been doing two things. Firstly, gathering information along with the Israelis about Iran's whereabouts of leaders, commanders, and also military bases, etc. And the second thing, bringing in military equipments and basically forces into the region in the form of a siege that they announced. It's not about economics, the siege. It's about bringing in more forces and bringing in more equipments for a future attack. These two are complementary in the Iranian military mindset. And so they are trying to deny them as much as they can. Of course, the supreme leader has a very pivotal role, symbolic place. And so I would imagine that that's the main reason. But, we're waiting to see when we will see him and how. But what we hear from Tehran, he's basically leading the decision making.
But obviously, even as the United States deploys more assets, gathers more intelligence together with Israel, as you said, it's also squeezing Iran's other very critical ally, Iraq, for example, cutting off all the dollars that were going to Iraq. They don't have access to them anymore, all part of an effort to get Iraq to dismantle the militias, the Shia militias. And meanwhile, you also have that other track in Lebanon where they're trying to get Lebanon and Israel to strike some kind of a deal. So there's pressure from all sides. And during this interval, what is Iran doing to bolster its own position?
Well, the Iranians are, getting ready for the next round. They see it coming because of the U.S. positioning and Israeli positioning. They are trying to support their allies in the region. They did it in Lebanon. They, went out of their way pressurizing the United States and the Pakistanis that if there is no ceasefire in Lebanon, we will not go to Pakistan. And ergo, after the ceasefire was announced, they went to Pakistan. In Iraq, it's a more complicated situation. There's a government formation ongoing in the country. There are lots of, different dynamics, including the dynamic that we saw unfolding against U.S. presence in Iraq. It's the first country in which the United States was forced to withdraw by force. That's very important, I think. And as go, we see U.S. pressure as well. And I think the Iranians will not, and they have a really hard position. If they support directly, they would be accused of interfering in Iraq's politics. If they don't, then their allies will not like it. And so they're trying to balance things in a way that is not full interference, at the same time support their allies against the United States and the pressure. And now that's, the toolbox is not that much big. The options are limited, as you said. Iran cannot do much, but the way it is gauging the Iraqi situation, I think, is a balance between not being accused of interfering, but at the same time putting its weight behind its allies in the political system as well.
But of course, another unknown is just how the Gulf countries will react if there is indeed a second round. In the run-up to the ceasefire, we were increasingly hearing that the United Arab Emirates certainly, and the Saudis maybe, would consider actively joining the war against Iran. How do you think this conflict has impacted relations between Iran and the Gulf, which are very complex?
I mean, there's an understanding of why Iran acted the way it did, though officially they are saying, no, Iran violated our sovereignty, etc. But I think when you talk to elites in GCC countries, they know that Iran was subject to aggression by the superpower, the military superpower of the world, and its ally, another nuclear power in the region, and they were the underdog in this fight. They had to resort to asymmetric means, and one of the asymmetric means was the Strait of Hormuz. Another one linking the war to global economy and energy markets to affect not only the United States, but also the international community. You have to protect Iran, the underdog that is subject to aggression, and Iran is putting pressure to that end. If you are not doing that, then you have to suffer.
But I mean, if Iran is perceived as the underdog here, because that suggests that there's quite a bit of sympathy for Iran, why then do all of these countries feel compelled to have U.S. bases precisely to protect themselves against Iran, and therefore, for that reason, principally find themselves being attacked by Iran? Their energy infrastructure and other assets were being attacked and caused huge damage, including to the country you're sitting in right now, Qatar. So that's clearly, changed things.
Yeah, of course. See, the base, we didn't have a precedent before this war. There were bases. They were used to occupying Iraq. They were used in occupying Afghanistan. The Iranians kept telling their neighbors, these bases are against us. They're not to provide security. They're not to protect you. They're against us. And now they have a precedent that these bases were used. The CENTCOM infrastructure were used for the CENTCOM itself. And the U.S. President, General Kane, all mentioned the countries that were involved in this war. And so the Iranians couldn't basically allow the U.S. usage of those bases and infrastructure without retaliating against them. That would be letting your enemy attack you with no retaliation, no stopping of it. If the Iranians didn't attack the 14 bases that went out of service, the U.S. bases, these bases were in full force supporting the war effort against Iran. Now, you would say why the Iranians attacked the energy infrastructure. Well, the Iranian energy infrastructure was attacked. Iran attacked energy infrastructures in Israel and in the region to basically deter further escalation in that regard. Why is it that it acted against these GCC infrastructures? I think they see the front as one front. When you have two aggressors using these bases and these countries against you, you see it one. So retaliation would go against you. You can't say, well, I'm not part of the war, but my land, my airspace, my sea is being used, but I'm not part of it. You are part of it. You can't deny that. I think there will be tough strategic decisions to be made in the region, both in Iran-GCC relations, but also within the GCC. These bases were not used to protect these countries. They were used, the defenses they have were used to protect these bases, and these bases were part of a war that was Israel's war. It wasn't GCC's war. It wasn't U.S. war. The U.S. was doing Israeli bidding, and these bases were used for Israel, to protect themselves against the security of Iran and the security of the GCC. This is, I think, is very clear now in the region, in Iran and in the GCC. And so there will be tough decisions. What should we do with these bases? How should we gauge the relationship with Iran moving forward? I think these are strategic questions that need answers, and it will take time for them to be answered.
Well, very hard to answer when you don't know what the second phase of the war, if and when it comes, will look like, how far the sides are willing to go in prosecuting that war, who else might join. And I would say that Saudi Arabia in particular is very pivotal in all of these calculations. And we know that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia enjoy a very special relationship, and we saw Pakistan emerge as the mediator. Can you tell us a little bit about why Iran agreed to Pakistani mediation?
The Pakistanis found themselves during the war between a rock and a hard place. They have very good relations with the Saudis. They have very close relations with the Iranians, and they didn't want to get involved. They were messaging from the get-go to Iran and to Riyadh, telling the Saudis, don't get involved, telling the Iranians, please decrease the attacks on Saudi soil. These were, messages received by both capitals. But I mean, as things happened anyway, and they got involved in the mediation, and they weren't the only party. The mediations started the second week. The Iranians were like, no, they attacked us. We have to increase the price and then go for a ceasefire, because we don't want to see our country being attacked every 6 months. And so they continued. But the mediations start. Egypt, Turkey, and also Saudi Arabia were part of these mediation efforts. But Pakistan came with its positioning from the get-go of the war, came as the party that was trusted by both parties to a large extent. And they have the backing of China, they have the buy-in of the regional powers, as I mentioned them, and they are trusted by the United States, it seems, and by the Iranians, and the head of the military has good personal connections with both leaderships in the two countries, and that's what gave it the possibility to basically bring the two parties together. But absent a political will in Iran and in Washington, I don't see Pakistan would have been successful in managing this. And now, with the political will being reshaped in both Iran and Washington, with the U.S. coming with a siege and Iran saying that with the siege we will not discuss, Pakistani influence is decreasing.
Well, I mean, one demand is that the enriched uranium be transferred out of Iran. Do you think that Pakistan could be helpful in that respect, being it is a nuclear power?
Well, the Iranian way of thinking about this very sophisticated issue is that highly enriched uranium should be diluted back to 20 and then to less than 20% for peaceful usage. The Iranians cannot, as far as I know, give up the highly enriched uranium. They can dilute it back because they don't have much uranium in the country. If this is out and then the United States violates its commitments, that is sanctions relief most probably, what should the Iranians do? They need to have some sort of leverage on their soil. And so the diluting back is the main thing. The Iranians offered it before the war, and they're sticking to it at this point. So it's not about Pakistan or any other power offering Iran one. It's about the Iranian principal position that we have this. It will be under international supervision, under international control. We will dilute it back under international supervision, but don't ask us to move it out because there's no trust. And that's, if there's a will in Washington, I think there is a way to get out of this deadlock as it is. But I think the most important thing is not the nuclear program. Now, they brought in the nuclear program, but it's about the future of dealings between Iran and the United States, because we have a bigger nuclear program now, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And that's the main guarantor against the United States. I think, to my understanding, geopolitically, the United States cannot do anything about it if there's a
not
conflict.
Unless they are willing to commit massive ground troops, which clearly they don't have the appetite for. And
It's not only about the appetite, Amberine. I think internally the United States cannot commit that. Its capabilities, I'm not sure. I mean, so far, 14 million ordinary Iranians, including folks that I know, have volunteered to fight on the ground. Volunteering is something that happened during the 8 years war between Iran and Iraq. 14 million online, you can submit your, you volunteer to fight. This is only on the public level.
Hopefully peace will prevail, Hassan, and thank you so very much for giving us so much of your precious time today.
Thank you, Amberine. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
And that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and for more in-depth coverage of the Middle East, please go to our website, www.al-monitor.com. Thank you and goodbye.